All right, we are now going to talk landscape approaches to food classification. And this is going to fit really well with where we've been and been through this conference today. So I'm going to introduce our panel, but then they're going to come up one at a time and they each have 10 minutes to speak. And then we will have a panel discussion at the end, similar to the last session. So the panel is a group of people that are out in the real world of trying to make this work. So I appreciate them all coming to speak with us today. So first we have Gwen Twillman, who's the Chief Knowledge Officer at the American Society for Nutrition. She will go first. Cheryl Toner is the National Senior Lead for Nutrition for the American Heart Association. Allison Stieber is the Chief Mission Impact and Strategy Officer at the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. And we want to get all representations of all organizations. So Anna Rosales is Vice President of Science and Policy at the Institute of Food Technologists. So we're going to start things off with Gwen. Come on up. Here's this. Awesome. And it's, I think you've got sound, so go on. Thanks.
All right. All right. Thank you all so much for having me here today. It's been a great day and a half. So as Joanne mentioned, Gwen Twillman, I'm staff at the American Society for Nutrition. In that role, I oversee our publications, our education, and our membership programs. And again, delighted to be here. I don't consider ASN a commercial interest, but I put it up here that I am a staff member. I've been a staff member for about 15 years. Okay, one of the things I was asked to address is how does ASN develop our public comments? So I just wanted to review this process with you. I think the biggest challenge is really for us to prioritize when and where ASN decides to make a comment. As you all know, there's so much out there related to policy and public issues related to nutrition. And we really try to be selective and focus on areas where nutrition science plays a key role and where ASN can provide a meaningful value. So that's our overarching approach to prioritization. We know we can't respond to everything, so we do have to be selective. And I think one of the most recent examples related to this are the 2025 dietary guidelines. As you all may know, the 2025 advisory committee was comprised of majority of the members are ASN members. About a day before the guidelines were released, we were informed about the second report, the foundational report, and about half of the authors of that report were ASN members as well. So we took a step back and we evaluated the materials that came out, and we decided at that point that our comments were going to focus overall on the scientific process. We weren't going to go one by one talking about the recommendations, but talk about the process, the need for transparency, the need for rigor, and the need to ensure evidence-based recommendations. So again, there's a lot we could have said, but we really tried to target what our approach was from that. But when we get an issue that we think deserves a response from ASN, the first thing we do is look out to our members. We have over 9,200 members right now. About 25% of those are from outside the U.S. We have over 20 groups. We call them groups engaging members, and they represent different scientific areas. So when an issue comes up where we want to provide a comment, we go to these groups. They have a leadership team that one of their charges is to really help advise ASN on issues related to their current interests. So we go to this group first to get their comments. And then if there is a policy angle, we have a committee on science policy and advocacy that has been very helpful in guiding how the organization responds to issues in the policy sphere. And another good resource to us, especially when it comes to issues related to food processing and formulation are our sustaining partners. We do have a group of 35 partners from industry and commodity boards. And if an issue is relevant in this space and we need some advice, we go out to this group too, and they really provide some valuable comments and advice for us. So then we gather all these comments, and then we go to our board and work through an official statement before it's released. And everything release is approved by our board of directors. So we try to have a process that's really driven by the science and can make a meaningful contribution. When it came to the definition of processed foods, ASN did release comments, as did many other organizations and individuals. And again, in this, we tried to focus on the science, the nutrition science. We certainly support FDA and USDA's efforts to develop a meaningful definition. We think this is critical for the research field. So we are really behind this effort and are anxious to see what comes out, and we'll likely comment on that. And we endorse IFAN's guiding principles. So thank you all who had an effort in that. And we published that in Advances in Nutrition, one of our journals. So we really appreciate that. We know that, as has been said the last day or two, processed foods can provide important nutrients and health benefits. And there's issues like convenience, affordability, that are really important. And we have to think about that as we think about ultra processed foods. And at the end of the day, when we think about what's coming out in the months ahead, we do think that there needs to be consumer testing and rigorous testing to ensure that consumers understand and can use any information that comes out. Just to touch on a couple related activities related to ultra processed foods. Some of you may have seen our great debate. This was published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition several years ago. And we had an online webinar, which is still archived on our website. And we also initiated a project last year with the Foundation for Food and Ag Research on advancing the science. And that is an issue or an area where we appointed an advisory committee last fall. And I have to be honest, we're still trying to determine out what is our lane in this area. And so I'm really anxious to hear the discussion this afternoon related to research priorities. And finally, just want to mention that our annual meeting will be held this July, and we have a number of sessions related to ultra processed foods. I don't see Brahma here today, but she's helping organize a session with the Office of Nutrition Research, looking at the government issues related to ultra processed foods. And we have a number of sessions too, looking at food additives, protein, and other hot topics. And our opening session will be devoted to the U.S. dietary guidelines. So we're looking forward to a conversation with the nutrition community about that. We just had our call for abstracts. Our deadline was Monday. We had a great response. Haven't started going through all of those, but we imagine there's a number of studies related to ultra processed foods coming out in that. So we'll keep you posted. And there we go. That was it. So I'll pass it over to Cheryl.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Thank you so much. The nice thing is Marie has got the little thing over there, so I just have to hand this off and not be the bad guy. So, and you obviously nobody's going over. So thanks so much. Yeah, you bet.
All right. Well, I too disclose that I am an employee at American Heart Association and have no other conflicts. Our mission at American Heart Association is to work for a world where to be a relentless force for a world for longer, that has longer and healthier lives. And our vision is the audacious vision that we're advancing health and hope for everyone, everywhere. So it's a tall order to fill, but I do appreciate that we're trying to really think about health holistically. And I did just want to briefly show this slide of the pillars of our work, and that science is really an underpinning. We have to have funding to do what we do. We have to protect our credibility. We're very fortunate to have a very broad network of active grassroots volunteers, but science really guides what we do in our programs, our advocacy, everything else. When I came to AHA 7 years ago, the different pillars that you see here related to policy, science breakthroughs, transforming healthcare, nutrition wasn't really integrated into all of those areas the way it is today. So that's been a big change for the American Heart Association, in that through programs like Healthcare by Food, which is food as medicine focused, and the periodic table of food, we're really weaving nutrition into pretty much everything that we do. And, we do a lot of work in communities, which I wasn't really familiar with before I came to AHA. And that's where a lot of these things come to life, is in the communities where people do buy food and, eat meals with their families and all of the above. So just to focus in on this topic, I want to share a couple of the science statements and advisories that guide our work in this area. There are differences. If you haven't noticed before, when AHA puts out a paper, pay attention to whether it's a scientific statement or a scientific advisory. A statement really is intended to convey the consensus among, cardiovascular and stroke and prevention experts, and in this case, nutrition related. Whereas an advisory is for topics that are more emerging and there isn't as much consensus. We know in nutrition there's never consensus, but more so than in some other topics. So in the latest dietary guidance that we published was in 2021. And just to focus in for a minute, that one of the overarching concepts that's very important to this guidance is that there is a focus on dietary patterns over foods or nutrients. And so because this is not a clinical guideline that AHA might publish for health professionals to use in practice, you won't find in here nutrient recommendations, even specific, servings for per calorie level for different foods. We do rely on the dietary reference intakes for people's, nutrient needs and that sort of thing. These are really intended to be principles, and to also give people flexibility, knowing that there are many different dietary patterns that can be helpful. We're looking to help people follow these principles. And it is hard to message when you don't have a very rigid message, but it is important. That's what we want people to understand, is that there isn't just one set of foods that are healthy. It's a matter of how those foods are prepared, selected, and that sort of thing. But there is some balance involved there. One of the things I'll hone in on is the recommendation to choose healthy sources of protein. So in terms of classifying foods, classifying foods as healthy is something that a lot of us have been doing for a long time. And it is not without controversy. Even calling a food healthy versus unhealthy has been controversial. With this particular category of foods, though, it's difficult to find another way to talk about this because it is such a diverse grouping of foods. And we do think that that's important. In the US, we know that most people, when they think of protein, they think of meat first, maybe dairy. And our recommendation is that most of your protein sources should be plant sources. So soybeans, other beans, lentils, peas. Also, regular intake of fish and seafood is beneficial, choosing low-fat or non-fat dairy. And if meat or poultry is consumed, we're not saying you shouldn't consume it, but we don't see it's absolutely necessary to consume. But if you do, choose lean and unprocessed. What is the rationale for that classification is really based on the nutritional quality of the dietary pattern. So rather than just the nutritional quality of individual foods, looking at how different choices affect that overall context of helping people to get the fiber that they need, helping people to have more unsaturated fats and less saturated fats. Knowing that you have flexibility within the diet to make some shifts. What we're looking at is the overall pattern. And then, of course, the science behind association, cardiovascular risk factors, or decreasing incidence, mortality, just depends on the individual component and how that plays out. we have also a recommendation to choose minimally or unprocessed foods over ultra processed foods. And at the time this paper was published in 2021, there was one RCT, the original Kevin Hall paper. Most of it was the association, the epidemiology that we've discussed today. But we really noted that there are healthy and unhealthy processed foods, and that really it's important to look at the nutrition. So choose minimally processed was put forward as a general emphasis, but noting that label reading, is important, and how foods are prepared is important, because a processed food or an unprocessed food can be more or less healthy depending on a lot of different factors. Again, a more difficult message to communicate to consumers, but the nuance was there. In 2025, really just a few months ago, we published a scientific advisory, again, for a topic that is more emerging in nature, around ultra-processed foods. Excuse me. And so it was noted, this is the top of a figure, and I'll get to the figure in a moment, was basically the authors, and it's a pretty long paper, but I'm just going to focus in on this figure for today's talk. They noted that most U.S. dietary patterns are heavier in unhealthy foods, and it doesn't, across processing levels. Really, it's high in saturated fat, high in salt or sodium, and added sugars. And so the idea was to help people choose a lower proportion of ultra processed foods, but really, looking at the nutritional quality of those foods. So there's a lot of examples given in the paper for these different categories, and it would be too much to put here, and you wouldn't be able to read it anyway. But the general concept was that they came up with just a simple matrix that showed, examples of foods that are less versus more processed, and examples of foods that are, quote, unhealthy, moderately, or healthier foods. They chose to use the term junk foods in the unhealthy category, and they said including junk foods, not to say that these are all junk foods, but I think that they explained that their rationale was that for many Americans, it's the things that people typically think of as not really providing a lot of nutritional value that are of the most concern, like sugary beverages, candy, cookies, things that are really mostly providing a lot of added sugars, salt, or, saturated fat, as the case may be. But the idea would be to move towards, depending on which screen you're looking at, and I see the colors are a little bit different, but on the top left or the bottom left being the foods that are considered the least healthy from a nutrition perspective and more processed, and moving kind of diagonally towards the top right, which would be foods that are less processed and healthier. But certainly there are foods that are called out in the paper as being in that bottom right category that are healthier foods, but more processed, and they're not to be thrown out. They really are. That's where educating the public about, nutrition and label reading is really important. And so when we take those science statements, one of the ways that they're brought to life is through policy. And so I did want to share that on our website, there are, every set of comments that we've submitted is posted online, but we also have these fact sheets that we produce on any particular issue. And so there's some overlap. This is the one on ultra processed foods, but that gives a background, the landscape, what's happening in policy around ultra processed foods. But in short, our public policy position is that policy should reduce or remove nutritionally poor ultra processed foods across different settings through legislation and regulation, really to focus on those that are high in added sugars, salt, or sodium, or saturated fat. And so several potential areas for focus are listed here. And we go on to say that if a policy that's more broad in scope, like we're seeing in some states, focuses solely on ultra processed as a category, that we would advocate for really focusing on those that are high, my time is up, in saturated fat, salt, or sodium. And those are some examples of things we've given comment on. You can look at those on our website. I'm happy to provide that link if anyone wants it. And I'll just close with saying that the Heart Check program is one example of classifying foods as healthy or not that's been around for 30 years. And it's really based on very old regulation for health claims that is evolved, has not evolved along with like the healthy definition. So you still have some older requirements that the Heart Check mark is required to meet because it is an implied health claim by the name, heart, and having a heart on the label. But we do try to, in our communications, not get stuck on food classification terminology too much. People want to know what an ultra processed food is. We explain it to the best we can, and then we shift to saying, hey, but focus on nutritional quality, and this is how you do it. And we try to use pretty pictures too, so that people we can really convey the deliciousness that we know people are looking for when they start thinking about healthy foods. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Come on up, Allison, please. Appreciate everybody staying on time, and
Wave at me frantically if I go over.
Marie will
Marie
be the
will wave
person.
at me
She's the
frantically if I go
bell
over. Great. So, good morning, everyone. I know we're moving into the latter part of the morning, and sometimes that is the time when everyone gets a little droopy, but hopefully I can shout or dance or wave my arms so you all stay awake just a little bit longer. I want to thank Marie and Wendelin for inviting me to speak today on this panel. I think, what I hope I can bring to you is sort of our membership, who we represent are the people that really are left with implementing what is put out from whether it's the federal government or guidelines from different groups. And that is turned out to be really interesting and challenging. And so we have tried to think about how we can meet this very big challenge of our membership, and particularly as it relates to ultra processed foods, but in many other categories as well. So I'm going to start out and just say a few words on how we think about statements, much like Gwen and some of the others did. And then I'm going to talk about a few new initiatives that we have created. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we are talking to our practitioners and how we think about nuance and how we are trying to empower them to remember it's not just a black or white situation, but that there really is a lot of detail and complexity, and how do we face that in an intellectual way. Here are my disclosures. I don't know if these all have commercial interests or not. I actually didn't notice that word at the top of the column. I just put my normal disclosures. So there you have it. So I want to start out and talk about our position statement. So as if you know anything about the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, you know that we have a very diverse membership. We have people who, work in WIC programs. We have people that work in ICU, in industry, for sporting teams across the spectrum. We also, of course, have membership from a variety of political stances. And so what we do for our position statements, because we get so much pushback. In fact, our most controversial position statement is hands down our vegetarian position statement. We get comments from our 2015 or 2016 vegetarian position statement to this day. People write us emails about it. I kid you not. And so when we along the way decided that to really kind of do the thing where you cover yourself carefully, we decided that all our major position papers that come from the Academy would be based on the highest level of evidence possible. And so we have a policy that says all our position statements are based on systematic reviews with meta-analysis when possible, or umbrella reviews if it's such a topic that there's so many systematic reviews that we can do an umbrella review. Well, as you may guess, those of you who've done systematic reviews, this is not a rapid process. In fact, my senior scientist says there's no such thing as a rapid review. They just don't exist. It takes a lot of time, and risk of bias and all the methods that go into those take a lot of time. So when new and emerging topics come out, and the one that most triggered us in the past couple of years, of course, were GLP-1s. When they came out, we couldn't wait for 3 years to do a systematic review. Number one, the time was, you have to respond much faster. And number two, there were very few RCTs at that time to even inform a systematic review. So we have to be able to move faster. Our membership demands that we come out with statements that are quick. So we began a new program. You can see it on the slide. It's called our Nutrition Fact Check. And we want it to be as neutral as possible. We want it to not be political in nature, but rather we want to arm our members and our practitioners and the public with just the facts. So each of these topics have been put out on our Nutrition Fact Check in the last 9 months, and they have 3 components to them. They have the first, which is what we call a summary of science. It's not a systematic review. It's not even a scoping review. It is a 3 to 6 page summary of the latest evidence, and trying not to cherry pick or to add bias, but rather to do as comprehensive an assessment without going crazy with references as we can. That's both on the web and you can download it by PDF. The second thing is we did a consumer or politician friendly document that is 1 to 2 pages that is very simple and has lay terms, so that if we had a lot of states that were starting to introduce these new Medicaid or SNAP waivers, that they were concerned about some of the things that were included in there that weren't necessarily evidence-based. So we created these 1 to 2 pages so that they could go to their politicians and they could go to their legislators and say, here's what the science actually says. And then the third thing is, because what we have found is people don't actually like to read, is that we have a little video. I know, right? Sad state of the world. They don't like to read. And so this QR code will take you to any of these that have come out. You know, I'm still blown away that when we ask people, please submit topics that you think are controversial and that we need to address, raw milk turned out to be one of the highest topics. And I was like, what? Did we not put that to bed forever ago? No, we did not, apparently. Now we have a whole new organization about raw milk that thinks it's way more nutritionally beneficial than pasteurized milk. So anyway, it feels like all things old are new again, and raw milk is back on the docket. So a lot of these we've talked about today. You've heard the great science behind them. Ultra processed foods was one of our first that we came out with last summer. And so much new data and information has been published since then that I start to get stressed that our summary of science is out of date. And what are we going to do about that? I'll just kind of move here. You can see the 3 resources in the little video thing. But after coming here and listening to all the presentations that I've heard the past day and a half, I think I feel much more confident that our conclusion of our summary of science is very much in alignment still with what I'm hearing from the science. I think obviously there could be nuance added. We heard about palatability and speed and energy density, but these are things dietitians have been talking about for the last 20 or 30 years. This isn't new, right? So it's just a reframing, a repackaging. And I really am pleased I got to hear all that great data and think about that, because I think we need to remind our practitioners, you've been doing this for a very long time. It's kind of like when personalized nutrition came out and we were like, oh my gosh, it's brand new. And you were like, no, that's what you've been trained to do your whole career. So we have to remind ourselves of that, right? So this is, the resources that we've developed that are layered on top of our position statements that are trying to be quicker, faster turnaround, but clearly do not have the rigor of a systematic review. And we're really transparent in saying that. We still believe that that evidence pyramid that we were shown earlier this morning is key, and that systematic reviews, meta-analysis guidelines are the top of the pyramid. So we think about that a lot. I do want us not to look so hard at the bark that we forget the forest. I think that in all these discussions, and as we talk about this, we sometimes forget to step back and say exactly what Eve said yesterday. We still have an entire world, but certainly the US population, that doesn't get in enough fresh fruits, vegetables, grains, legumes, nuts, seeds. And we can't lose sight of that as we get all wrapped up in some of these other things. And so when we came out with our statement the day of the dietary guidelines, you're at 9 o'clock at night pounding your head against a brick wall, wondering exactly what you can say that will remain credible but not totally cause someone to bomb your house. I think that what we try to do is lean in to those things that we all know, that we need more fresh fruits and vegetables, or any kind of vegetables and fruit, frozen, canned. We need more of those. We need more of the foods that we know are good for the microbiome. We are good for heart health, reduce the risk of cancer. And then there were some other things that were very confusing, and we're hearing tons of information from our members about what is this saturated fat thing? How do we stay under 10% and drink more whole milk and eat beef with butter on it? Like, how do we do all of that, right? And so there's a lot of confusion, but if we focus on the things that we know we all agree on that we're not doing well, I think that is a huge. So this is from the Global Nutrition Report. You can see it by income. I think this reflects both the United States and the global at large. Those individuals living in poverty, they have less, they are certainly more likely to take in less fruit, vegetable, legume, nuts, whole grains, but really even high income also is not taking in enough. Now you can be critical of this chart. I will say that the cut points are based off Eat Lancet, which a lot of people don't like. But if we can't even meet Eat Lancet ones, we certainly can't meet even higher ones, right? So I think you can take this as a very conservative, wow, we're not meeting what we should be for most of these things. Of course, fish, dairy, and meat are in a little bit different category, and you see the income range being broader. I want to just talk a little bit, when we talk to our practitioners, it's fine to have these, big statements and to dive into the details, but sometimes you have to relate this to people. And I started thinking about the ultra processed foods and the processed food conversation and reminding, and I've been on like 1,000 calls lately with different groups within the academy, that they were trained for nuance. They were trained for complexity. They were trained to be individualized. And I'm going to use this hamburger example. We used to joke in the hospital that there wasn't such thing as a hamburger emergency. This is not an emergency, but it does illustrate that you can't assume, right? So if you look at this, and I'm going to put my pointer on the big one, but you all can see wherever. So I just put a McDonald's beef hamburger, right? I'm not saying it's pure beef, but it's beef basically. So you see the calories across compared to the Impossible Burger, the Harvest Burger. You can see that the McDonald's burger is a little higher, but look at the protein. It's actually the Harvest Burger that has the highest proteins. We have all this discussion about protein, what kind of protein. You can talk about that if you would like, but it has the highest protein. When we look at fat, the Impossible Burger has the highest fat. Like, this is the nuance of it. This is diving in and thinking more critically. Saturated fat. Again, the Impossible Burger turns out to have the highest saturated fat. And then sodium, of course, the McDonald's burger has the most. But even in micronutrients, you can see there's subtle differences. Fiber, I think, is the thing that we think about the most. But there's other kinds of things that we need to think about. But what I also tell our individuals is you have to think about access. You have to meet our clients, our populations where they're at, and cost matters. And so when you look at the little clear box at the bottom, you can see that I took and figured out the cost for the different items. I will admit that AI helped me in this, full disclosure. But you can see, the McDonald's hamburger is fairly inexpensive, but not as inexpensive as the Harvest Burger, which has higher protein. So that's when we, and this is just one example. You could use tons of other examples that look at legumes and nuts and vegetables of different types, right? We need to not come at this from a right or wrong or black or white. We need to come at this in a way that is thoughtful and considerate, and remember that not all foods are created equally. So finally, I just want to say that we, like probably everyone in this room, responded to the FDA's RFI on UPFs. That's a lot of acronyms. What you can see are three main topic or points. We also use the IFAN's guiding principles, grounded out our comments, but we also really focused on ongoing research is needed. We heard a lot of great research today. We clearly have a lot of unanswered questions. Whether they want to reevaluate the GRAS or not, a phased approach to policy. And I heard Liz very strongly say they haven't even started implementing past iterations of those policy. And here we are bringing in brand new that may be impossible to implement. So really thinking carefully about the opportunity to bring in a very phased approach so that industry and foods and schools and VAs can all get caught up. And then finally, we want to strike a balance, obviously, between equity, implementation, cost is wrapped up in there, and our public health goals. And I'll just end with, and I know you all know this as well or better than anyone, but it clearly can't be the fault of the past guidelines our health today in the United States because hardly anybody implemented those. So if they were fully implemented and the health was bad, okay, I can follow that, but it wasn't, right? And so conversely, now we're blaming a guideline that frankly, we're still adopting a lot of the statements of, and we're coming out like we've never thought of ultra processed foods before in our lives, which is crazy. So I think this is, again, about packaging and marketing, and that we have to remain grounded in the science. And that's what we're attempting to do. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Anna, let you go. It's really, I'm very fortunate to be in a food science and nutrition department, and I have all these organizations are good friends of mine. So it's nice to have everybody here in the room, and I really appreciate IFANS bringing us all together. So you're next.
All right. So IFT, we're a little bit different than the other organizations that have come before me because we're a professional society of food scientists. And these are the people that work in the middle sector of the food system. They're the ones that take raw materials and turn them into products that are available and ingredients that are available for consumption. At IFT, our mission is to connect the global food system communities to advance the science of food. And we aim for a world where science and innovation are recognized, are universally accepted and recognized as essential to a safe and nutritious, sustainable food supply for everyone. And I say that because we really think that food science and science are something that we cannot have a food supply without. So when we're talking about processed foods and ultra processed foods, our response is yes, we need them all. We have to have them so that we have a food supply that's accessible for everyone. So at IFT, as a scientific nonprofit, professional society, we convene our community, we convene our members, we collect their information, their science, their research, their voice, and we seek to elevate that. We seek to elevate that in media and comments and resources. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about how we elevated that with the dietary guidelines and with ultra processed foods, and then also share with you some of the resources that we've developed around that. So IFT comments for UPF are first. Or wait, no, I thought it's the other way around. No? All right. So the UPF comments. So similar to ASN, how ASN collects comments from their groups, what we do at IFT, we have divisions. So divisions are kind of member interest groups on specific topics or research and science areas. And whenever there's a comment period or a comment opportunity, we like to engage our divisions to collect their input. So what we did was we offered to all of our divisions, which there's over 20 of them, for the ones that were interested, to give us their input on the questions that were set out for the RFI. We recorded those and transcribed all of those conversations, synthesized the information, and then put it together to proceed with our comments. And what our comments identified, these main points kind of came through the divisions that answered. And we wanted to make sure that any UPF definition is anchored in nutritional quality and not processing level alone. We want to avoid oversimplification or stigmatizing classifications. We want to recognize the essential role of food processing. That's what I want to highlight, because a lot of times when we're having these conversations, we're forgetting why we process to begin with. We process not for fun. We process to make it safe. We process to extend the shelf life. We process for all of these really essential reasons. We're not just doing it to make it more hyper palatable or something like that. So we want to make sure that we're really maintaining that the baseline of why we process, so that we're not just kind of throwing processing under the bus, so to speak. We also want to focus on evaluation of ingredients and the context. So the presence of added ingredients should not automatically define a food as ultra processed. And that's a big one within the NOVA system, looking at the different ingredients and then even looking at like the purpose of the ingredients. Does your body really know the purpose of the ingredients if it was added because it was an acidifier or it's a vitamin? My body doesn't. We want to make sure we clearly distinguish any processing from formulation and ensure alignment with the dietary guidelines for Americans where possible. We really do think that in an ideal world here, I know we're not in an ideal world, but in an ideal world, all of our different policies, all of our different recommendations would be able to come together and have consistent communications to consumers. That's the ideal world we would love to have. Oh, there's slides missing. It's okay. Weird. All right. So I also had 3 slides that were on dietary guidelines and what we did on the dietary guidelines with our membership and how we engaged in that process as well. But with the dietary guidelines, originally when it was the formal process, we engaged, we submitted comments on the questions and continued throughout the process to engage our members. Once it released and that whole process was thrown kind of upside down like the pyramid, we also engaged our membership and we came together and we collected their feedback and we released a statement pretty quickly about some of the challenges of that, which I don't have my slides to talk about what those were, but our comments are on our website. But we hosted a community conversation because what we want to do at IFT is to really collect that input from our members to continue to elevate it. So when we hosted a community conversation, we brought together, it was about 250 or so individuals came and just dialogued about the challenges that they saw within the dietary guidelines. But not just the challenges, they actually dialogued about the opportunities too. Because to Allison's point, when you step back from the bark and you look at the forest, like, yeah, we could say that we didn't like the transparency in the process. We didn't like that they veered away from different things, that they didn't include really food science perspectives. Yeah, we don't like that. But when we take a step back, a lot of the things are still the same. We're not consuming enough fiber. We're not having enough fruits and vegetables. We have a lot of the same opportunities. And I was happily kind of, I shouldn't say surprised, but like pleased that our members, a lot of them saw that. Our community saw that yes, there's challenges here, but there's still a lot of the same opportunities and challenges that we had before that we want to move forward. So at IFT, we're going to continue to engage in that process as those dietary guidelines get translated into policy. To Allison's point before, the last dietary guidelines were still being translated into policy. So hopefully those things that were consistent from the ones before to these, those aspects that we can agree on are what we're really going to push to be brought forward. We want to make sure that anything that isn't translated into policy is grounded in evidence, is grounded in science. At IFT, we have 4 advocacy priorities that ground kind of everything we do in terms of when do we comment, when do we engage, when do we kind of go and educate people, policymakers, Hill staff, consumers. And what we're trying to always do is to focus on food science integration as central to the food system and bringing forward nutrition security, food safety, sustainable food systems. We're always advocating for research funding, science-based regulations, and professional representation of food scientists in those critical forums and appointments. So that's kind of the lens that we look through as we're bringing these things forward. And we'll continue to do that as we're looking at dietary guidelines. Now, I said we convene, we collect the science, and we elevate it. So we do that with a lot of our resources too. Is it going to go forward? Marie, will it let me go forward to the resource? There we go. We have resources and content that we're constantly bringing forward. So one thing that we're doing, in addition to just resources, is some work we're doing with our Food and Nutrition Security Steering Committee. This group, Hong is one of the founding members of, but this group came together because they saw challenges in food and nutrition security with food science solutions. And they identified these different challenges, and one by one, they're hosting roundtables and producing white papers to talk about some of the solutions that are interdisciplinary across the food system and food sciences that could be solved with some food science solutions. And so these are just 3 examples of some papers on reducing food loss and food waste, advancing biofortified and underutilized crops, and sustainable production of nutritious foods. And I call these out. There's about 2 others or 3 others that are in process or will soon be published. I call these out because this group came together to find food science solutions for food and nutrition security. They didn't come together to talk about processing, but every single time that they've met and that they've convened these roundtables that are interdisciplinary, processing is part of the solution. There hasn't been a single time that processing was not an essential tool to bring forward solutions for a more sustainable, equitable, accessible food system. And I want to elevate that because part of this is responding with the science that we have, but part of this is also making sure that we're continuing to tell the story about what processing does and making sure that people are aware of that it's not just food safety and it's not just something that we do because food companies want to make things more palatable. There's a lot of different reasons that we process, and we need to continue to talk about that. But with that, the other thing we do, it's not like me. Where am I pointing? Maybe. We also have resources. There we go. We have resources that we've developed. Some of our resources are for food scientists, but increasingly our resources are for the community at large within the food system. We're recognizing that when we only make resources for food scientists while they need them for their technical jobs, and we're doing that because they're our members, we also need to make resources available for those across the food system to understand what food scientists are doing and what the different things are that are coming up in the conversations around food science. So some of the things that we've done is create collections around ultra processed foods. We've had a special edition in our Journal of Food Science around ultra processed foods. We've created a set of resources on additives, low calorie sweeteners, and ingredients that you're seeing pop up on these state banned lists, talking about what they are, where they're regulated, what they're allowed, how they're allowed in different regulations. What are some of the alternates? What are the challenges to the alternates? And what's the latest research on it? We're recognizing that while food scientists need this, dietitians also need this. Public health researchers need this. Consumers are curious about this, and policymakers, they're scratching their heads and wondering, how do you pronounce that word and why is it in the food? So we want to make sure that we're creating content and resources with the knowledge and information from our members and making it available for others so that we can make sure that science is part of those conversations. So here's just a few of those resources, but there are more, but largely around the ultra processed foods, additives, low calorie sweeteners, dietary guidelines, and more. I did not include hyperlinks. We launched a lovely new website this Monday, so none of my hyperlinks would have worked, but they're there now. With that, I think we can go to the panel. How to do this.
We're going to invite our panel up. And I just want to point out, I was a dietitian first, got a PhD in nutrition, and then I came to Minnesota as a 100% extension position a long time ago. And Isabel Wolf was my person that hired me. And she said, you are going to be the science communicator for IFT. And I thought, this is before you could Google stuff. I don't know what IFT is, so I guess I am. So I really appreciate back in the day when IFT had the science communicator program to go out and find out about, and the thing that I find really fascinating now, I really appreciate all the training I got back then, is that the questions now from the media are on food science. It used to be like 98% of the questions were nutrition. They would never ask a question about food processing. So it's a great time to have a good background in food science. And to have all these wonderful communicators, I really appreciate that. So whoever has a question, raise your hand and I will call on you. Barbara. But Marie, we have other mics, right?
So I think particularly Cheryl, when you were talking, I was reminded that in the 2020-25 dietary guidelines, it's not only food patterns, you're right, that is a major focus, dietary patterns, but nutrient density is also a major theme in those guidelines. And just as you talked about a matrix, you can create a matrix where you look at energy density and nutrient density and then wind up. So you don't have to deal with processing at that point. You just focus on meeting those criteria for what is a high energy density, what's a low energy density, and then across the other axis, nutrient density. It's just another way to show people groupings of foods.
That's a great idea.
I mean, can I say something about that? So, I think one of the things we lost when the current guidelines came out compared to the DGAC report is the dietary pattern modeling work, where they would take, this is the healthy, whatever American diet, this is a healthy vegetarian, this is a non-healthy American diet, and they would model what nutrients of concerns could be met and how with the different serving size. That was very implementable. Right? We could take that, we could say, these are how many servings that you need to meet your calcium or your iron or whatever, but we don't have that anymore. We don't know if we follow the upside down pyramid, will we meet the nutrients of concern? We don't know that.
Their questions. Please.
So I have a question about the future definition of UPF. And I was asked at the end of my presentation yesterday, should we keep chasing this definition that is in some ways, there's resistance to evolve it from the people that created it. And it's been said that it's supposed to be agnostic to nutrition, but I've heard from everybody that nutrition is essential and you can't have it agnostic from nutrition. So how do we negotiate this tension between sort of how and why it was created and where it needs to go for actual evidence-based science?
I think we should go right down the line. I'd like to
Okay.
hear everybody's answer
Yeah.
to that. It's a great question.
This is not to answer your question, but I'm remembering one of my composition professors in college saying, once you write it, you have to put it out there and interpretation is going to happen, and I think that is, to me, we all have the classification system of Novum. They may have intended it to be agnostic to nutrition, but it's very much about health. And so then you have to look at all the things that impact health. It's the same reason why in our 2021 dietary guidance, we addressed structural factors that limit a person's ability to adopt a healthy dietary pattern. In the US, that's structural racism. It's the affordability of food. And we know right now that concerns around affordability are really getting in the way of people being able to adopt healthy dietary patterns. And so, and I'm thinking, today I'm like, to think about flavor and enjoyment of food, is something that we haven't done in our guidance, but I do think that is really critical. And so I hope we'll come to a place where in the nutrition community at large, or in the food and health community at large, we can not be so territorial about what our area of expertise is and recognize that this cross-disciplinary expertise is essential to make really meaningful guidance for the public. And then to not only say what is going to help make you healthy, but help to establish policy that'll make it possible. So it's a little bit of aspirational thinking there, but I do think I think the cat's out of the bag with UPF, and I think we have to continue to try to define, but also continually to push back on the definition and to push back on the idea that we need it, because even, like I said, even the idea of healthy versus unhealthy food remains controversial. And so I think we'll continue to debate it. But in the meantime, we kind of have to be a part of that conversation.
And I agree with that as well. And I think from our point of view, we would like to see new definitions come out to really guide future research. And so we have good comparisons so that we can learn more. So we'll see. I do hope we get that opportunity to comment when it comes out. I know it'll come out shortly, right? We think. But we're anxiously awaiting to see what comes out. But again, we do support that.
Here, we can. So I'm going to think a little bit more logistical, I guess. I absolutely think we need a definition for all the reasons that Gwen just said and that Cheryl just said. I think when we think about the definition, that we have to have something that's implementable for and practical. And I think that is a very complicated, hard thing to do. I think the IFAN's guiding principles are exactly where to start. And then we look at different ways to meet those principles with a tool that has the best specificity and sensitivity that we possibly can. And I was talking about this with someone else earlier, where if we have a screening tool for malnutrition, for example, I know it's a different thing, but it's a tool, right? That tool needs to have the minimum number of false negatives and false positives. And right now, the tool that the most individuals are using, doesn't have a very good specificity, right? We're lacking that specificity. It puts things that I think as a nutrition community would count as healthy in the unhealthy category of 4: whole grain bread, yogurt. Those are the 2 everybody uses, but there's other categorizations, right? So I think the public and research deserves a better, more accurate tool. The question is how to get there. And I think that's really, really difficult. And so I think we have a lot of super smart people, just even here in this room, that we could develop a tool that both considers the criteria of nutrition quality as well as energy density. And we could develop something that is simple and easy to apply. And I think that's where we need to go.
So, yes, we need a definition because we need to put it in a box so we can consistently research it and we can consistently understand. Because right now, with the vagueness and the difficulty in replicating the definition in research studies, it makes it a much hairier challenge than it needs to be. If we can have a consistent definition, it makes us understand much clearer what we're actually dealing with. Now, I don't know that we need more definitions. And I think that we've kind of personally, speaking as myself, not as IFT, I think we've oversold the concept that we think that if we have a definition, that once we know what's UPF, what's not UPF, we're going to be able to clearly suddenly have clarity in how to communicate to everybody, and they're going to follow this, and it's going to be, this utopian universe of something. I don't think that's the truth. I think what we need to do is we collectively as a scientific community need to have a definition, but we also need to make sure that we're looking at all of these different pieces that also have risk related to them. Because the definition is supposed to help us understand what's the risk of these different categories related to diet-related non-communicable diseases. That's not the only thing that's related to diet-related non-communicable diseases. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's also related. And what we have to do is start to talk about that there's trade-offs in this world. And it's not clear where one thing is going to be the same everywhere. It's going to look different for different populations and for different individuals. And we need to get a lot better talking about what are these different levers? What are the risks? And then how do these different cohorts talk about risk management, whether that's the dietary guidelines and looking at a US population basis, or if we're looking at WIC and women, infant, and children, like it's going to look a little different for everybody because we're all a little different. So I don't think I think a definition will help us, but I don't think it's going to get us to that clarity that we're like, oh, we're going to be able to move forward in such a single way.
Other questions? I really appreciate this because I completely agree. When you think of why do we do food processing, and I want to kind of defend the dietary guidelines whole process. And Barbara knows this, other people that have been on the committee. I was on the 2010 committee, and it was an amazing opportunity. And we had a couple of people on the food science side that, including me, that knew a little bit about food science. And generally the dietary guidelines didn't include much on food science, so it didn't get in. But it's an amazing process. It's very transparent, and it got to a good place. And I think beating up on the dietary guidelines really does offend me. That there's all this corporate interest, and all the people are taking out to dinner. It's nothing like that. It's just a volunteer ton of work to update all the science. And it's an amazing process that we have in the US. So I really like to defend that and appreciate all the organizations that are involved and putting in comments. And I think for Barbara, having worked at FDA too, appreciating what FDA has to do with labeling and, beating up on them and saying, and I agree with all of this, that no matter what our definition is, to have some kind of metric that helps us pick better diets based on processing, it's formulation, and that's what we're trying to do, put more fiber in, put more whole grains, and we've made a lot of progress. So, great to have all of the people in the room here that can see opportunity, because just complaining isn't going to get us anywhere either. So, all right. Question over there, Chris.
Yeah, Joanne, I think you just mentioned labeling, which is my question's premise. If we have a definition for ultra processed foods, which I think we would probably all agree that for researchers, that would be awesome. For people, what do we do with that definition? Does it lead to a label on package? We have things like the non-UPF verified that are coming to the marketplace at the moment, but would a definition would the next logical step be a policy proposal for labeling of UPF?
So I don't have the answer to your question, Chris, which I think is a very important question. But I just got back from a conference in Latin America where they use symbols on front of the package labeling to indicate salt, sodium, sugar, whatever. And PAHO, the organization that is trying to improve health within Latin American, Caribbean countries, did a bunch of really interesting studies and published them in great journals showing the impact of those symbols on front of package labeling. And they're very good. They're sort of the leaders in that globally. Now, I know that not everyone agrees that they have lasting impact, that they may have impact initially, but do they have that lasting impact? And I can't answer that question, but I do think we don't do that, and many other countries in the world do. When I was in Singapore, they had color coding and different symbols and labeling. And, I think we still don't know the full impact of that, but something has to be done to clearly indicate opportunity for improvement in choices.
I think we have to walk before we run because we don't have a definition and consistency in research. So to jump ahead and say we may or may not need a label for UPF, I think it's too much too soon. Like we need to have consistency in the research to then identify, what is there that would even need to be labeled or not labeled. But I agree though, front of pack labeling in a different sense has some interesting research around it.
You're next.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joanne. And I know this session is titled the approach towards the food classification system. So I would like to hear a panel, not talk about the tree, but to talk about the forest. If we see the definition is only tree, and what is the overall classification system? So, in the sense of the initial intent of a classification system, use and the misuse of the classification system. And if we're not satisfied with the current classification system, what will be the future classification look like? So just general, your comments on the classification system.
That's a loaded topic. I'll start because I have the microphone. I would throw the question back and say, do we need a classification system or do we need systems potentially? Because what's the endpoint? Are we looking at a classification system just for diet-related non-communicable diseases? Are you looking at classification for other outcomes or other risks? Because right now we're talking about it mostly for diet-related non-communicable diseases, but there's other challenges out there beyond that too. So I think that we're never going to be able to have any one perfect system, and that we're going to have to look at things in kind of a much more holistic way to understand what is the risk benefit analysis for the different populations. It's inherently not simple.
I don't have a great catchy response to this, but I think, if we step back and say, what's our goal? Our goal is to improve the health of the population. Our goal is to reduce chronic disease, prevent chronic disease, make our population healthier. To me, food classification or labeling, these are all tools for implementation and education. And so we want a tool that is useful, it's understandable. I'm not going to lie, I was a lover of MyPlate. I thought it was simple. I thought it was clear. I thought that it showed portion size, which, we heard a lot about that today. So, I think we need those tools that we can then translate into different cultures and different people at different education levels with different needs and resources. And I think classification is one of those tools. Of course, it's also useful in research to help us all be able to have more homogeneity within our data sets. But ultimately, when we're talking about research, and you did a great job of showing this yesterday, it matters about the outcome. So you have to have a definition, you have to have a tool over here, and then you have to care about the outcome. Am I talking about colon cancer? Am I talking about heart disease? Am I talking about weight management? Like, what am I talking about? So I think for me, it allows us to have homogeneity, to have implementability, and to be able to communicate better broadly.
I thought that was quite thorough. I don't have anything else to add, Cheryl.
Yeah, I just think the one thing I want to kind of add on, I guess, is just the challenge that we have in today's environment of being able to have a system that's intended for research, which is what NOVA was originally intended to be, although maybe they did intend it to be a public communication tool after all. But I see the value of it as a research tool, but in today's environment, it's really hard to say to consumers, don't worry about that. That's for researchers. You don't need to worry about that. People don't want to feel that you're being anything less than transparent with them. And so I think that's the challenge we have today, is that anything that's valuable in research is going to make its way to the public discourse, and especially if it seems to solve a problem that's been unsolvable, if it seems to give you like a clear, easy answer that you've been looking for. So I do think that as a dietitian, I tend to kind of not want a classification system for foods for the purpose of communicating with consumers, but they're very necessary in a lot of other ways, and so, but I don't have an answer for how you shift from what's useful in a research or a regulatory context and kind of go to the consumer and try to get them to not focus on those things too heavily, because it's different for everyone. What people need is different. So
Yeah, please.
Try to keep it very brief. So as a person whose age lets me be in nutrition before NLEA, before nutrition facts, when nutrition labeling was voluntary, and it became mandatory because of the Surgeon General's report, the various things that we had saying we have to do this. But the philosophy behind the way nutrition facts was presented is that the consumers could use the information to make their own choices. It's not government telling you what to eat or not eat, but using the percent DV, you can figure out how this fits into your daily diet. I know we've now evolved to a world where we want to be more prescriptive, but I think it's important to keep that historical perspective in mind. Many countries that went quickly to front of pack labeling did not have a good back of fact labeling. We've always had that, and often what's missing is the education on how to use it.
Go ahead. Yeah, you're next.
Thanks. Yeah, I wanted to pick up on the front of pack nutrition labeling piece again. I guess the whole aim of this is to help health outcomes from diet, and so it seems most of the evidence points to the high sat, fat, salt, sugar, and overconsumption and shortfall nutrients people are not eating enough of. So for what's happening in the US, would that be enough? Rather than having a UPF definition, the word processing is in there, and that's not the factor that matters. So if an informed front of pack nutrition labeling scheme came out in the US, would that be enough? And as Bob said, there's different experiences around the world with different approaches, and some of them have worked a bit and some of them haven't, and some have put taxes and that's just gone somewhere, the taxes have, and made the food cost more. So is high fat, salt, sugar, and maybe indication on shortfall nutrients enough to give something to the public that they can think, okay, something tangible's come out of this, I can see it on the actual products, and I can take some personal action. I just wonder your thoughts if that's enough, because UPF, the interpretations are so wide and different. It's gonna just be contentious whatever comes out.
are you asking if the nutrient disclosure on the food label is enough to help people really make decisions? Is that
Yeah, if there's a high, medium, low for the
high, medium,
sat
low,
fat
like with the front of
on the
pack?
front,
Yeah.
rather than the nutrition panel on the back, just to pull out the things people should be.
My opinion is that there's not any one strategy that's going to be enough. I just think that the complexity of food decisions it's just so complex. And so I think it has to be, as Barbara said, education. There has to be communication, and recognition that the reason why people eat the way they do so often is about things other than health. It's just the reality of how we eat. And so, I think that's part of the argument for pushing for healthier foods in the food supply, and like that becoming more prevalent and easier, like make the easy choice, the one, or make the healthy choice the easy choice. But, people do want choice. And all of the evidence from consumer research today says that people want a guide. They don't want experts telling them what to do. They want to make their own decisions. But there's a tension with that because it's overwhelming. A lot of information can be overwhelming. So I just don't think there's one strategy. I think it's essential, but I don't think it's the only one. Yeah.
I was just going to add on to that. I completely agree with you. I think that when we think about drivers, I think which is you were talking about, this is one strategy, but I think poverty, access, food supply, all those things are probably bigger drivers, maybe not. It's hard to know. It's hard to judge, and it depends on the person and the population and where they're at in terms of resources. I do think it's an important driver, but it's certainly not we really want to improve the health of the population. We need to give all people, well, this is my Allison statement, not the Academy statement. We need to give all people universal health care, and we need to give all people access to healthy foods. That will improve health, right?
I think that to answer your question, would front of pack labeling with nutrients be enough? I think it's a split question, because enough for what? Is it enough for people to make healthier choices based on the foods and what the foods provide? Yeah, that's enough to inform a healthier choice. Is that enough for consumers to be satisfied when they feel like they've been bamboozled and have no understanding of what's in their food, how it's made, or what the ingredients are? Absolutely not. It's not going to be enough. Consumers think that UPF is junk food, and they think that the food supply has loopholes. They don't trust what is in and how it's made, what the words say. They don't understand them. They don't know how to pronounce them. It's confusing. They want transparency. They want to understand what it is, why it's there, how it got there, where it came from. We, myself included, I worked in food companies before I joined IFT 4 years ago, for decades have been saying, only give the really clear, simple marketing message. Don't give them more because they won't understand. I think we've done ourselves a bit of a disservice thinking that people wouldn't understand, so we didn't give them enough to understand.
Okay, I just want to mention, I want to thank our panel, but I think the issue here really is the food additives. And it has nothing to do with the dietary guidelines and how to get in grass and all that, because I totally agree with you that consumers think they're being poisoned and we're not telling them. And since everything is open access, they have access to the same information we have. So I do believe that to just say, hey, we're going to ignore we don't care about ultra processed foods. It's basically concern about, we had great coverage here at this meeting, colors, alternative sweeteners, all these things that they think are poisoning them and they don't know anything about. So to just say we are going to give them the same information, it's on the back of the panel, that's it. They're going to keep asking for more. So at this point, I am going to invite up, right? Please come and thank our panel.